Every major American city has neighborhoods that the city's promotional materials don't feature. Areas defined by concentrated poverty, high crime, failing infrastructure, and the specific kind of disinvestment that compounds over decades until the conditions become self-sustaining. Some of these are famous, most are not. The ones nobody talks about are often the ones where the conditions are worst and the resources are thinnest. These are the 10 worst ghettos in America you've never heard of. Number 10, Englewood, Chicago, Illinois. Englewood is a neighborhood on Chicago's south side with a population of approximately 24,000 people and a per capita income of approximately $12,000, roughly 1/4 of the Chicago city median. The poverty rate exceeds 45%. The neighborhood has lost approximately 75% of its population from its post-World War II peak, when it was a densely populated working-class community of over 97,000 residents, anchored by retail employment, light manufacturing, and the elevated rail infrastructure along the 63rd Street corridor that connected the neighborhood to the broader Chicago economy. The decline of Englewood is a concentrated version of the pattern that affected Chicago's south and west sides broadly. The departure of manufacturing employment beginning in the 1950s, the process of blockbusting, in which real estate agents would sell a single home in a white neighborhood to a black family, then circulate fear of neighborhood change to prompt white residents to sell quickly at reduced prices, which the agents would then resell at elevated prices to black buyers, stripping wealth from both sets of families in the transaction. The federal redlining maps that categorized black-majority neighborhoods as high risk for mortgage lending, preventing the capital investment that maintains housing stock, and the city of Chicago's decision to concentrate public housing high-rises in already stressed south and west side neighborhoods rather than distributing them across the city. The Sears store at 63rd and Halsted, which at its peak in the early 1970s was the highest-grossing Sears location in the country, closed in 1979. This is not a small detail. The closure of the anchor retailer of a neighborhood's commercial corridor has documented cascading effects on surrounding businesses, foot traffic, and the tax revenue that funds services. The 63rd Street Commercial District contracted significantly in the years following the Sears closure and has not recovered. The violent crime rate in Englewood has placed it among the most dangerous neighborhoods in Chicago in multiple years of documented crime data. The homicide rate is disproportionate even within Chicago's elevated city average. The community has also been the site of significant organizing, urban farming projects on vacant lots, violence interruption programs, and community development efforts that represent the determination of residents to address conditions that policy has not resolved. Number 9. North Camden, Camden, New Jersey. Camden, New Jersey is one of the most comprehensively distressed cities in the United States by any standard metric of urban poverty, and it exists in one of the most economically prosperous states in the country. New Jersey consistently ranks among the top states by median household income, and Camden consistently ranks among the lowest cities in New Jersey by essentially every economic measure. The cognitive dissonance of extreme urban poverty in a prosperous state is not incidental to Camden's situation. The property tax structure that funds New Jersey municipal services means that Camden's low property values generate insufficient tax revenue to fund the services that a population in poverty requires, while adjacent municipalities in Camden County have the property values and fiscal capacity that Camden lacks and do not share. Camden's per capita income is approximately $15,000. The poverty rate exceeds 35% citywide and is significantly higher in North Camden specifically. Unemployment consistently runs at multiples of the New Jersey average. The city reached a population of approximately 125,000 at its 1950 peak, driven by employers including RCA Victor, which had its major manufacturing facilities in Camden, where the world's first major commercial radio broadcast was made in 1921, the New York Shipbuilding Corporation, whose Camden yards built significant portions of the World War II naval fleet, and the Campbell Soup Company, which has been headquartered in Camden since 1869 and remains one of the few major employers still present in the city. The industrial departures of the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s removed the employment base and the tax base simultaneously. The population declined from 125,000 to approximately 73,000 today. The housing stock left behind by departing residents deteriorated as the rental market consolidated into absentee ownership with insufficient maintenance incentive. North Camden specifically has childhood lead poisoning rates among the highest in New Jersey, a state that has documented lead paint contamination as a pervasive public health issue in its older housing stock. The combination of lead exposure, concentrated poverty, and the specific stressors of living in a high-crime, low-resource neighborhood produces documented developmental consequences for children who grow up in these conditions. Camden disbanded its police department in April 2013, laying off all 273 officers, and reconstituted public safety services through a new Camden County Metro Division, a restructuring that was controversial at the time, and that resulted in documented improvements in police-community relations and reductions in certain crime categories in subsequent years. The economic conditions underlying crime in Camden have not been resolved by the policing restructuring. Number 8. The Hill District, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The Hill District in Pittsburgh is a neighborhood that sits immediately adjacent to downtown, literally a 10-minute walk from Point State Park and the confluence of the Allegheny and Monongahela rivers, with a poverty rate that has consistently exceeded 40% and a per capita income significantly below the Pittsburgh city average. The neighborhood is 1 block from the PPG Paints Arena, where the Pittsburgh Penguins play. The juxtaposition is not incidental to the neighborhood's history. The Hill District's history as a center of African-American cultural life in Pittsburgh is genuine and documented. The jazz scene of the 1930s through 1950s, Crawford Grill, the clubs on Center Avenue, the musicians and audience that constituted a specific cultural environment, was nationally recognized. August Wilson, who grew up in the Hill District, set 9 of his 10 Pittsburgh cycle plays in the neighborhood, drawing on the community's mid-century life for Fences, Joe Turner's Come and Gone, The Piano Lesson, and other works that are now part of the American theatrical canon. In 1956, the Urban Redevelopment Authority of Pittsburgh approved the demolition of the Lower Hill District to construct the Civic Arena, an arena whose roof was designed to be retractable, but in practice rarely was. Approximately 8,000 residents were displaced, the majority black, and a commercially active neighborhood center that included approximately 400 businesses, 95 homes, 3 churches, a synagogue, and the cultural institutions of the Lower Hill was eliminated. The replacement community development that the Urban Redevelopment Authority promised was not delivered. The Lower Hill remained partially vacant and underutilized for decades. The Civic Arena was renamed the Mellon Arena, then demolished in 2011. The land on which it sat is now the site of a development project called the Lower Hill that has been in planning and early construction for years. The Hill District community organizations extracted a community benefits agreement from the development, a formal legal commitment to affordable housing, local hiring, and community investment that represents the kind of institutional accountability that the 1956 displacement entirely lacked. August Wilson described what was taken in a 1996 address. They tore down our community to build an arena for the Pittsburgh Penguins. The arena is gone now too, but we never got back what was taken. The current development on the site of the demolished arena is a decades-late attempt to answer that observation with something more than an apology. Number 7. Fruitvale, Oakland, California. Fruitvale is a neighborhood in the flatlands of East Oakland in Alameda County with a predominantly Latino population. The neighborhood runs along International Boulevard, which was formerly known as East 14th Street, the commercial spine of East Oakland's Latino community, and a poverty rate approximately double the California average. The Bay Area's housing cost crisis has concentrated low-income residents in the flatland neighborhoods of Oakland, Richmond, San Leandro, and East Bay cities, while higher-income residents displaced from San Francisco and Silicon Valley have moved into previously lower-income areas, accelerating the displacement of the populations who can no longer afford even the historically lower-cost neighborhoods. The neighborhood is most widely known outside of Oakland because of the shooting death of Oscar Grant III on the Fruitvale BART station platform in the early morning hours of January 1, 2009. Grant, 22 years old and returning home on a crowded New Year's Eve train, was detained on the platform by BART police officers after a reported altercation on the train. Officer Johannes Mazerla shot Grant in the back while he was lying face down on the platform. Grant died at Highland Hospital later that morning. Mazerla was convicted of involuntary manslaughter, not murder, in 2010, in a verdict that produced significant protest in Oakland and nationally. Mazerla served approximately 11 months before his release. The case became a significant reference point in discussions of police accountability that preceded the national conversation that the deaths of Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, and others in subsequent years generated. The economic conditions that define Fruitvale as a neighborhood existed before January 1, 2009, and continue after it. Concentrated poverty in one of the most expensive metropolitan areas in the United States, housing stock that reflects decades of maintenance deferred by absentee ownership and low rents, limited retail and employment within walking distance, and the specific pressure of gentrification that is changing the affordable housing inventory available to long-term residents in real time. The Fruitvale Village transit-oriented development, housing, retail, and community services built adjacent to the BART station and opened in 2004 has been studied as a national model for mixed-income transit-adjacent development. It is genuine investment in a neighborhood that needs investment. The displacement pressure from rising land values adjacent to a BART station in a high-demand region is also genuine, and the two forces are in direct tension. Number 6. Watts, Los Angeles, California. Watts is a neighborhood in South Los Angeles with a population of approximately 27,000 people and a poverty rate that has consistently exceeded 35% citywide in this section, with child poverty rates significantly higher. The neighborhood occupies a specific place in the American cultural memory, primarily because of the 1965 Watts Rebellion. 6 days of civil unrest from August 11th to 17th, 1965, triggered by the traffic stop and arrest of 21-year-old Marquette Fry by California Highway Patrol Officer Lee Minikis on Avalon Boulevard, witnessed by a growing crowd that included Fry's mother and brother, and that expanded as additional officers arrived and the confrontation escalated. The rebellion that followed resulted in 34 deaths, over 1,000 injuries, approximately 3,500 arrests, and an estimated $40 million in property damage to the approximately 46 square mile area placed under curfew by Governor Pat Brown. The National Guard was mobilized, approximately 13,900 soldiers, to restore order. The rebellion's scale was the largest urban unrest in the United States since the Detroit riots of 1943 and was followed by the McCone Commission report, chaired by former CIA Director John A. McCone, which identified the contributing factors: unemployment in Watts at a rate of approximately 30%, inadequate schools, housing discrimination that confined Black residents to the area, and severe tensions between the Los Angeles Police Department and the Black community. The specific economic geography of Watts within Los Angeles is part of the explanation for why conditions persisted after 1965. The neighborhood has no direct freeway access for most of its residential area, limiting automobile-based employment access in a city designed around car commuting. The Los Angeles Metropolitan Transportation Authority did not provide direct rail transit to Watts until the Blue Line opened in 1990, 25 years after the rebellion, whose causes included employment inaccessibility. The Watts Towers, 17 interconnected steel and concrete sculpture structures built by Italian immigrant Simon Rodia between 1921 and 1954, entirely without machinery or paid assistance, from salvaged materials including broken tile, seashells, glass, and mortar, stand as a National Historic Landmark in the neighborhood. Rodia worked on them for 33 years and then gave the property to a neighbor and left. They represent one of the more specific examples of sustained individual artistic achievement in an economically distressed environment, and their existence in Watts is not incidental to the neighborhood's identity. Number 5. Southside, Youngstown, Ohio. Youngstown, Ohio was one of the most productive steel cities in the United States through the mid-20th century. A city whose identity was so completely built around steel production that when the industry contracted, the city contracted proportionally. The pivotal moment was Black Monday, September 19, 1977, when the Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company announced the immediate closure of its Campbell Works facility, eliminating approximately 5,000 jobs in a single announcement. The closure was not the beginning of the industry's challenges in the region, but it was the point at which the cascading collapse became undeniable. Over the following decade, approximately 50,000 steel-related jobs were eliminated from the Mahoning Valley, including direct manufacturing positions and the support, service, and supply chain employment that those positions sustained. Youngstown's population peaked at approximately 168,000 in 1930. By 1980, it had declined to approximately 115,000. By 2000, it was approximately 82,000. The 2020 census recorded approximately 60,000 people, a 65% decline from peak, a loss of more than 100,000 people over 90 years. The housing stock, the commercial buildings, the school facilities, and the city infrastructure were all built for the larger population and have been inadequately funded for the smaller one since the industry left. The south side of Youngstown concentrates the conditions that the citywide statistics distribute across neighborhoods. Poverty rates exceeding 40%, housing vacancy in some blocks approaching 50% of existing structures, violent crime rates that place Youngstown among the higher crime small cities in the United States, and a commercial landscape stripped of the retail and service employment that would require a viable customer base to sustain. Youngstown has been the subject of significant urban planning attention as a model of what researchers call shrinking cities. The Youngstown 2010 plan, adopted in 2005, was among the first American municipal plans to formally acknowledge population decline as the operating baseline rather than a problem to be reversed, and to plan around managing decline rather than projecting growth. The plan has been studied internationally. The conditions in Youngstown's south side have remained severe. Number 4, Kinloch, St. Louis County, Missouri. Kinloch is an unincorporated community in St. Louis County, Missouri, with a population that has declined from approximately 18,000 in 1960 to approximately 200 to 300 today, a decline of approximately 98%. Kinloch was established as an all-black community in the early 20th century when racially restrictive covenants in surrounding communities excluded black residents from living elsewhere in St. Louis County. The community developed its own schools, churches, businesses, and civic institutions in the enforced segregation of the Jim Crow era. The expansion of Lambert-St. Louis International Airport beginning in the 1980s involved the acquisition and demolition of a significant portion of Kinloch's housing stock, displacing residents from a community that had already been experiencing the economic pressures of post-industrial St. Louis County. The combination of the airport displacement, the loss of the residential base that supported the community's institutions, and the general economic decline of North St. Louis County produced conditions in the remaining Kinloch community that are among the most distressed in Missouri. James Norris, a longtime Kinloch resident who documented the community's history, described the airport expansion displacement as, "They didn't just take the houses, they took the community. The houses could be rebuilt, what we had built together, the schools, the churches, the sense of who we were, that couldn't just be rebuilt somewhere else. The remaining Kinloch population maintains a post office, a few churches, and the institutional memory of a community that was larger and that was reduced by forces external to its own choices. Number 3. East St. Louis, Illinois. East St. Louis is an independent city in St. Clair County, Illinois, separated from St. Louis, Missouri by the Mississippi River and the state line. Close enough to downtown St. Louis to see its skyline clearly from East St. Louis streets, but functionally disconnected from St. Louis's economy and public services because the state border creates a complete governmental separation. The population of East St. Louis is approximately 18,000 people. The poverty rate exceeds 40%. The per capita income is approximately $13,000. The city is among the poorest in the United States by any measure. East St. Louis, at its 1950 peak, had a population of approximately 82,000 people and was an industrial center of genuine economic significance. The meatpacking plants of National City, the industrial area adjacent to East St. Louis, employed thousands. The aluminum ore company's East St. Louis operations were major employers. Armour and Company, and later Pfizer's chemical operations, were significant presences. Monsanto had operations in the area. These industries made East St. Louis prosperous through the first half of the 20th century and constituted a tax base that funded city services and infrastructure appropriate to a city of that size. The industrial departures came in waves between the 1950s and the 1980s. Each departure reduced employment, reduced the tax base, and reduced the population as workers followed employment elsewhere. The industries left behind environmental contamination as their legacy. The East St. Louis area has documented contaminated sites from decades of heavy industrial operations, and the public health consequences of that contamination fall on the low-income residents who could not move away from it. The fiscal collapse of East St. Louis has been severe and prolonged. The city has been under various forms of Illinois state financial oversight since the 1990s because its tax revenue is insufficient to fund municipal services at minimum operational standards. The school district has been under state control. Individual schools have been closed because the facilities were inadequate for continued operation and the district lacked the resources to repair them. The fire department, the police department, and the municipal services that residents depend on have all operated under the constraints of a government that does not have the money to fund them adequately. The Cahokia Mounds State Historic Site, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and the largest pre-Columbian urban settlement north of Mexico, at its peak between approximately 1050 and 1100 CE, housing an estimated 10,000 to 20,000 people, is located a few miles from downtown East St. Louis. The proximity of one of the most significant archaeological sites in North America to one of the most distressed cities in the United States is a specific kind of geographical irony that neither the State Historic Preservation Office nor the city's redevelopment plans have fully figured out what to do with. Number 2. Midway, San Diego, California. The Midway Pacific Highway neighborhood in San Diego is not typically cited in national discussions of American urban poverty. San Diego's overall economic profile is well above average, driven by defense spending, the biotechnology sector, tourism, and the University of California, San Diego. The city's median household income and median home price are among the highest in the country. The Midway area exists within that prosperity as a specific pocket of concentrated poverty, elevated crime, and inadequate housing that reflects patterns common to military-adjacent urban neighborhoods nationally. The combination of low-income civilian population, transitional and single-room occupancy housing, and the proximity to military employment that is not accessible to most civilian neighborhood residents. San Diego's unhoused population is one of the largest in the United States relative to the city's size, and it concentrates geographically in the Midway area, the adjacent East Village neighborhood, and areas around the trolley system's downtown stations. The specific dynamic of San Diego's homelessness reflects the city's climate. The mild year-round temperatures make outdoor living survivable in ways that are not possible in Minneapolis or Chicago or Boston, which means that people experiencing homelessness from across the country make their way to San Diego and remain there. The concentration of unhoused individuals in specific neighborhoods produces conditions in those neighborhoods, sanitation, safety, commercial viability, that affect housed residents who share the streets. The cost of living dimension of San Diego's poverty is significant and is poorly communicated by the nominal poverty statistics. Median home prices in San Diego exceeded $800,000 in 2023. Average monthly rent for a one-bedroom apartment exceeds $2,000 in most San Diego neighborhoods. A household income that would be solidly lower middle class in Memphis or Oklahoma City is functionally poverty level in San Diego, unable to afford stable housing without devoting more than 50% of gross income to rent. The low-income residents of Midway are poor in a city where being poor costs more than it does almost anywhere else in the country, which is a specific compounding of disadvantage that the standard poverty line does not capture. The Midway District has been the subject of redevelopment discussions for years, with proposals for the land adjacent to the sports arena and the former Qualcomm/SDCCU stadium site, which could bring mixed-income development, retail, and commercial activity to the area. The timeline and the affordable housing component of any such development are the key variables that determine whether redevelopment benefits current low-income residents or displaces them further. Number 1. North Tulsa, Oklahoma. North Tulsa is the portion of Tulsa, Oklahoma, north of the Frisco Railroad tracks and the IDL, Inner Dispersal Loop, the physical and historical dividing line between the historically black north side of the city and the historically white south side. And it has a poverty rate that consistently exceeds 35%, a median household income approximately 40% below the Tulsa city median, and a vacancy rate in its housing stock that reflects decades of population loss and disinvestment. The specific history that makes North Tulsa's current conditions the culmination of a documented sequence of decisions rather than a random economic outcome is the Tulsa Race Massacre of May 31st to June 1st, 1921. The Greenwood district of North Tulsa, known as Black Wall Street, for the density and prosperity of its black-owned businesses, including hotels, law offices, doctors' offices, a library, and commercial establishments, was destroyed over approximately 18 hours when a white mob invaded the neighborhood, following an incident at the Drexel Building downtown involving Dick Rowland, a black shoe shiner, and Sarah Page, a white elevator operator. The exact nature of the incident was never determined, but the response was one of the worst incidents of racial violence in American history. The death toll has been estimated at between 100 and 300 people, though the remains from the massacre are still being investigated through archaeological excavation of suspected mass grave sites in Oaklawn Cemetery and other locations. The investigation is ongoing as of 2024 and has produced confirmed remains. Approximately 35 blocks of the Greenwood district were destroyed by fire. An estimated 10,000 Black Tulsa residents were left homeless. Property losses, businesses, homes, churches, schools have been estimated at over $30 million in 1921 dollars. The community rebuilt. By 1942, Greenwood had substantial commercial activity again. The second destruction of the Greenwood district came through urban renewal. The construction of the IDL highway through the neighborhood in the 1960s and 1970s physically severed Greenwood from the downtown and demolished additional commercial and residential structures. The combination of the 1921 massacre, the post-war economic pressures, and the 1960s highway displacement created the layered disadvantage that North Tulsa's current conditions reflect. The Tulsa Race Massacre was not included in Oklahoma's public school curriculum for decades and was not widely known nationally until the centennial in 2021, and HBO's Watchmen television series brought it to broader public attention in 2019 and 2020. The 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre Centennial Commission completed a report in 2001 identifying reparations for survivors and descendants as appropriate, but reparations legislation has not been enacted. The most recent living survivors of the massacre, Leslie Benningfield Randall and Viola Fletcher, testified before Congress in May 2021. Randall died in October 2023 at the age of 109. 10 neighborhoods, Englewood, North Camden, the Hill District, Fruitvale, Watts, Southside Youngstown, Kinloch, East St. Louis, Midway San Diego, and North Tulsa, each with a specific and documented history of how conditions this severe come to exist in the wealthiest country in the world. Concentrated poverty, policy failure, deliberate disinvestment, the racial geography of redlining and blockbusting, the collateral damage of industrial collapse, and, in North Tulsa's case, a direct act of destruction that was not publicly acknowledged in Oklahoma schools for a century. The conditions are not mysterious. The paths that created them are documented in public records, federal archives, census data, and in the memoirs and testimonies of the people who lived through them. What has not been documented as clearly is a path out of them that works at the scale the problem requires, a scale that the incremental community development projects, the community benefit agreements, and the individual development plans have so far not reached. Hit that like button and subscribe. More content like this coming.